and welcome to the How of High Performance. Now, I think today's guest almost doesn't need an introduction because her energy is so vivacious and her mission is so powerful if you've come across her in any format. I am so thrilled to have the one and only Nishma Patel Robb, who is founder of Glittersphere and co-founder of Hera, here to talk to us today. Nishma, a huge
Thank you so much, Sally. What a pleasure to be here. Always great to talk to you.
So I know your passion is about women and stories and making sure women have a voice and it's heard, and also it becomes a really healthy income stream, which I couldn't applaud and endorse more. Could you just give us a bit of an overview of your incredible career to date and how you've got to be doing what you are now, so we understand where your wonderful wisdom that's going to flow
I'd
comes
love
from?
to. Thank you. Well, I've had predominantly a marketing and media career. So I always talk about it as kind of analog to AI is the kind of breadth of my career, starting at teletext, actually in a sales environment, which perhaps not everyone knows, but I started life as a salesperson. Not because I actually wanted to. I always wanted to be a marketing and a creative, but needs masters. I needed to kind of earn some money, and a sales role was kind of easier to get at the time. It started in sales at Teletext and kind of ended my 30-year career with a 10-year stint at Google, leading brand marketing for Google and all its sub brands in the UK, and led some of not just some of the significant campaigns at Google from a marketing point of view, but also a lot of our developing some really core initiatives around digital skills and communication. I also led the Women at Google group for many years, which I think was an interesting point in my kind of life and career of really understanding the power of it, because Women at Google wasn't just about leading an ERG. It gave me an opportunity to really kind of figure out and think about the impact any individual can have on gender equality. And that's from I'm sure we'll talk about it, but from working with Gina Davis Institute and thinking about representation in film through to advertising and a lot more.
Amazing. And then tell us about Glittersphere
So
and what
I
you're doing
wrapped up
now.
that career at Google and left with this intention of like leaning into this idea of what impact I could have with women. So throughout my career, and some of it comes from a childhood point of view or just an upbringing, was wanting to see more fairness, more representation, more equality. And also being able to kind of focus in the stuff that I love doing. I think inevitably in jobs, as you get more senior, you end up doing less of the stuff you really love doing and more of everything else.
True.
And I was, maybe it was turning 50, having that moment of going, I want to do more of the creative stuff. I want to feel more impact with the work I'm doing. And it led me to creating Glittersphere, which is a platform and a community to help women be more visible. I talk about going from being invisible to being unmissable. And the heart of that is about building personal brand in the modern age, but also really taking control of your story and how and where you tell that. In addition to the Glittersphere, I also have another business that's absolutely connected called Hera. And Hera is the UK's first female-led and female-focused and produced podcast network. And I have two co-founders in that business. And Hera is, I suppose, in many respects, tackling what I've tackled at different points in my career, whether it's in leadership, whether it's on film, whether it's in advertising. This is specifically about video podcasting and really tackling the fact that, unfortunately, like most other categories, it is still very male skewed, despite audiences being 50-50. So we decided that rather than moan about it, we were going to do something about it. And we created Hera, which is effectively a podcast network that makes shows, takes existing shows, and helps women's shows be monetized and seen as far as possible.
Oh, amazing. Amazing. So, from all that wonderful experience, both in life and in work, career, change, I always like to start these conversations by asking for your, Nishma, your simple human definition of what the term high stakes means.
I like the fact that you say that, because I do think high stakes means different things at different points in my life as well. Because, what can feel like risk at some point, and is high stakes just risk? I don't know. Actually, I'm going to say, to me, it's actually, I think it's when the outcome has the potential to fundamentally shift the kind of direction and trajectory that you're going in. So it's not about those marginal or incremental kind of shifts and changes we make. Sometimes they feel risky, sometimes they don't. This is, for me, high stakes is like fuel on the fire, quite dramatically shifting in that way. And I think when, for me, that's in life and work. I've had some big leaps when I was younger that I had to, when there was no safety net underneath me, which meant that it was kind of thinking about whether I was prepared or skilled just wasn't in the mindset. I was just going to go for it. High stakes now
Hmm.
is slightly different because actually it's kind of testing my identity in some respects. High stakes is about, I talk about reinvention is at the heart of everything I do at the Glittersphere and at Hera, but it's interestingly one of the toughest things. And I think one of the most high stakes things you do, choosing to put yourself out there and be more visible, choosing to shape or reshape or reinvent your identity is high stakes because it's a determination of what you're going to keep and retain and what you're going to build new. And I think, when failure isn't just a line on your CV, it's something that's really tested your identity, and it's what you take from those learnings and take it forward and what you decide next. That
Yeah,
resilience.
absolutely. So moving nicely then, thank you for setting me up for the next question so well. I'd love for you to pick just one example. I know there'll be a plethora, but one that's particularly meaningful to you or you think is very helpful for others to hear when you had to navigate a high stakes moment from a purely work perspective. So my second question, therefore, will be around
Mm.
purely personal perspective. So it could be from your executive career, it could be in your entrepreneurial career, but a moment that you just think, yeah, that was a high stakes moment. And given that this is the how of high performance, unpacking how you navigated through as a
Yeah.
senior
So
leader.
I'm going to reflect back on a time when I was at Google and we were facing quite a significant suppose business and PR crisis around around the YouTube products. This was around something that was termed at the time brand safety. So this was about having unsafe content and advertisers next to it. It was on the front pages of the Times newspaper. It was being broadly talked about in the industry. We had customers wanting to pull advertising, etc. And my job at the time was leading everything that we did from an advertising point of view into the business community. It's very neatly in my role because we were about to step out on some big stages. Hence, obviously, it's all been timed, but we were about to step out on some big stages in the advertising world. So, therefore, we were front and center. This was the very first moment that the business, the entire Google business, was going to address what had happened. And so the high stakes was like,
Wow.
I'd only been in the job probably about 6 months or so as well. So it was like incredibly like, holy shit. And there were different stages about actually when I think about the how, when I really dealt with that moment of crisis, because it wasn't just for the crisis was for the business, but it was my responsibility. But it was also my responsibility to my career and to my team. So that's where I felt, and I think actually when I've been able to kind of age and wisdom has been able to teach me now, I that reliability and not letting anyone down is a huge factor for me. And that sometimes can play a bigger part when I think about high stakes. But in this one, I remember distinctly it was a Sunday, which wasn't often that we kind of came together on a Sunday. We came together as a team on a Sunday because the event that we were speaking at was first thing on Monday morning. So we had to kind of group. And I was in a room with some very, very, the most senior people at Google across not just EMEA, but globally, who I'd never had any, some of them I knew well, some I'd never had interface with, plus lots of comms team. It was a big room of people. It was a bit daunting in itself to go, wow. And initially, I just
Sounds
wanted
it.
to sit
Yeah.
back because my assumption was, we're going, they're all experts. They've done this 10 times over. Who am I to kind of pitch in? I'll do my bit where I need to. But felt that I was there to be a more of a passive role, kind of like, okay, I've heard everything. I'll make the adaptations rather than seeing I had any agency in that room at all. And interesting, as I heard the conversation play out, I didn't necessarily agree with some of the approaches that they were considering. And not because they were wrong, but because I understood the audience and contextually the UK market, which was ultimately where most of the news was going to be because it'd been broken in the Times. I knew that market better than anybody else. I live here, have worked in it for a long time. So it was this interesting point where I started to realize to go, oh, hold on, I don't agree with that. And I don't think that's going to work, and was trying to find my voice as to kind of how do you respectfully disagree with some people who probably way more qualified in the true sense of what was being dealt with. But actually, interestingly, the president of EMEA at the time, Matt Britton, who I knew very well, and I'd known him, I suppose, in my career prior to arriving at Google, which is why I always talk about reputation and personal brand being so important, because he hadn't known a huge amount about me in my 6 months of being there, but he did know about me for 20 years before. And he was
Hmm.
listening to this room, and he must have observed me sort of looking a little bit uncomfortable, thinking, like, hold on, I need to say something. And he stopped and he just said, from everything you've just heard, what would you do if you were the client right now? How would you respond? Sorry. First, how would you respond if you were a client? And I was like, okay, which is a really smart way of doing it because it gave me opportunity to be somewhere comfortable, which was like, oh, well, I had been a client at Google's for many years in my agency role. So I was like, well, this is how I'd feel about it. And he said, okay, so on that, what would you do? And I remember taking a big gulp, and there is that moment in your brain where you go, I either say exactly what I think, and this is going to risk my reputation with all these people who are going to be like, what do you know? That's rubbish. Or this is going to be the greatest thing I've ever done because not because I knew it would work or it didn't work, but it was more for myself that I would have been in alignment in backing myself, basically. Having almost kind of gone, what do you think? Which I was insanely kind of like, you're asking me in front of me. Anyway, I told him what I thought we should do, which was all very authentically me. It was really from my gut instinct, and actually was allowing me to draw on all of the years' experience, which is exactly why I was in that job, which we never think about because we all have imposter.
Exactly.
Anyway, just long story short, they adopted my approach. We did it. It was very successful. It wasn't just my approach; it was an approach we crafted together, but it was on my suggestion. And I think about that moment and go, not only has a lot of people talked about how we as a business managed and navigated that crisis and situation with the greatest level of kind of humanity and grace and, you know, real sense of, taking responsibility of the challenge, the problem. Um, and it meant it set us in a very different course, not just for dealing with that problem, but for how everything impacted the teams, the business. It was a real big pivotal point. And actually, people do talk about it as being almost a bit textbook. And at some point, I'm sure it's going to be in a Harvard Business Review about how businesses tackle situations like this, because it was of that level in scrutiny. And there was loads of things that happened thereafter as well, which was really good because it became a guiding light for how we managed things, because people kept coming back to going, hold on, are we doing this? Are we back to those values? So for me, it was high stakes, not just from a business point of view, because we had a lot of stake. It could have gone horribly wrong and made things much worse for us. But it was really high stakes for me and the team as well. And actually, I think for Matt, who stopped and went, what do you think? Because if I'd said something stupid, he would have been, not that he'd have been disappointed, he might well have been disappointed, but I think it would have been his instinct and judgment on backing me would have also been wrong. So hopefully that kind of does it.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, true. It's interesting because then I haven't stopped and thought about this enough. And as you were talking to me and asking me about this, has made me really think about it. Everything I talk about today is about authentic communication. Everything I say to people, I go, it's the most successful thing you can do, and it's really hard. And you have to work and craft that authenticity. It's not aspects of it come naturally because it's your values, but it's something to do. What I did in that moment and what really helped my career, and lots of things I did in the process in the 10 years afterwards, which I kept kind of grounding back to stuff that I had done, have always come from that point of authenticity. And I think it probably is why I consider myself a bit of an expert on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow, what a
Your
moment.
tone, how you feel about stuff,
I'm
that's
going
what set the moment then.
And what I'm going to do in a moment, in my moment with you, is I'm going to ask you to unpack that a bit more for us. But before we do that, could you share, if you're willing to, a high stakes moment in your life, Nishma? Because I always am very passionate on these calls to say, look, people are not just big job titles or successful entrepreneurs or visionaries, voices. They're humans, and we have lives outside of work. Is there something you've navigated personally or willing to share with us? And then again, that unpacking of how you've navigated through that high stakes moment from your personal life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably one of my most visible, in the sense I've chosen and made it visible, moments in my kind of career and life, which again is interesting that I made it visible, is the decision I made a couple of years ago when I kind of pressed the big red button on my life. So I left, leaving Google, which I think on paper had everything I could have ever wanted. It was the job I loved, my dream job. It was a senior role, had incredible prestige, had incredible financial security. And, on paper, it was perfect. I looked up and it wasn't what I wanted. And I looked up that ladder
Interesting.
and had a sense of frustration, not just around it's not what I wanted. It wasn't a sense of attainment for me. It was not a sense of desire. and also this kind of inner frustration to go off and do something else. I think whether it's the kind of mortality of hitting 50 and you go, right, well, how many more years am I going to do this for? And it was interesting. I think it was like a real wake up call of going, not only do I not want my boss's job, as much as she was brilliant, and there's like, she was definitely, you are suited to different things in life, and it wasn't for me. It was a real realization. I spent 30 years climbing to that position, and then to go, oh, hold on, I don't want that. It was like probably one of the like toughest things. And I decided, high stakes was going, I'm going to trade it in. I'm going to hand in my badge for something else. The high stakes thing is you're like, holy shit, I don't know. And I still don't know. I still have days, which I think is a really honest bit. Nearly 3 years on, I still have moments where I'm going, did I make the right decision? Which is a really difficult thing to say, because it's, I think as human beings, all we want is certainty. And the high stakes for me, not knowing exactly how it's going to pay off yet, the high stakes is I chose uncertainty over certainty. So I chose
Yes.
not a path well trodden. I chose something without a plan. I chose a feeling and an instinct over all of the things that I think life is meant to teach you, and as teaches you to find security. I'd spent so much of my life looking for security and solid foundations, and in a moment I went and go, no. And that, I think, will continue to always be the most high stake moment of my life. It'll be undecided for now as to whether that was the best thing I ever did or the craziest thing I did. But I'm true to my word about I'm leaning into reinvention. I'm not just lent into, I'm leaning into reinvention. I'm asking myself, what don't I want to do? And I'm also asking myself, like, what's the stuff I really want to do? And I think holding myself to account to those goals and ambitions is definitely the thing. I bat myself at a time I'd never bat myself.
Oh, good, and good for you. So, if anyone listening or reading or watching who's thinking on a personal side, I want to press that button, I want to change my world, blow it up, whatever language you want to use for it, but make significant change, especially, you did it doubly. You did it in your work world and your personal world, in your personal world. That's quite a lot. Anything you can share on that, like how you got the courage, the bravery, the conviction to stop thinking, because a lot of people, I think about that in the background but don't actually ever do it, and a decade passes. How did you actually get to doing it, Nishma?
Well, I think one of the things, as you say, actually, it's not a things like this are never in the moment. We talk about button press, that the light comes, whatever it is. It's never like that. Maybe it is for some, it's definitely not like that for me, not for, and most people I speak to, it's not like that. It is something that happens over time. I think some of the things that I learned, though, there was a number of things. One is, like, in order to hear myself, and you have to, without getting too woo-woo, you've just got to go inside. And I wasn't going inwards. And I tell you why I wasn't going inwards for such a long period of time, is because I wasn't able to silence the noise around me. And if I think about my room in that high stakes moment from at Google, in that decision making moment, actually what I was doing while I was kind of listening to what was being said around me, I was able to kind of play the equalizer. I started to listen. The sound inside me became so loud I couldn't ignore it, because it was so loud in my head going, this doesn't feel right, you should say this is that. And until I was handed the mic effectively to do that. In my life decision, it was not dissimilar, right? But there wasn't anyone handing me the mic.
Okay.
What I had to do is I had to turn down the noise around me. And that's not necessarily someone in your ear, but it's almost, maybe it's your own inner voice, but it is also stuff you read, and all the inputs you take in. That's noise, right? I had to turn that down to really try and listen to myself, because without that, I think it's really hard to have your own judgment rather than some kind of curated judgment. So in that meeting room at that point, I could have taken a curated position. I've taken that, and this, and therefore I come up with that. And I didn't. I chose, which, I reflect back on it going, my God, I was brave to do that. So I don't know what came over me to do it. But there was something inside me that was so strong to go, a conviction and a belief to go, I think this is right. Yeah. I don't want to curate it. And in my real life, I'd spent so long curating it and never being happy with it, because you take inputs and go, well, that's the right solution. That's the right solution. You tell yourself something. When I started to silence that noise, again, because the conviction or the thought was coming louder, I had to listen to it. I needed to really understand it. When I trusted my instinct, that's when I was able to step over fear. And I just don't think I don't think any of us are tuned into our instincts enough. And I'm a really instinctive person. I lead with instinction. I kind of like everything is like instinctive to me. And yet, interestingly, how many times I don't use it in those critical moments. I now do. Right? I've now learnt, and I teach other people about this, how critically important it is to tune in. I think also like visibility matters. I think people look to you for cues and you look for cues as well. And I think it's kind of not, you know, almost this idea of perfection. I wanted to be perfect in that job. I wanted to be perfect in the job I have, in the marriage I had, both situations, professional and personal. There was a visibility of identity that was there. And there's a lot of risk. As soon as you go, I could have fucked it up and got it all wrong. And I could be right now, who knows? That's like a huge thing. And I think the more I've become comfortable with imperfection, has been better for me, because I'm able to allow myself that grace to go, okay, I might get it wrong, but it doesn't matter. At least I'm trying. And I think, saying
Yeah.
something, doing something is way more visible and louder than to do nothing. And I spent so much of my life and career at times in very important meetings being silent, thinking that was the right thing to do. And I now know it's not noise for noise sake, but if it's here and it's in here, then I'm going to say it. I think the fact that decisions are very rarely just data, I don't think I've ever been a really data decision person. I love data and definitely help it to lead it. I was never one just to lean on it. So that was kind of a key thing. I think that authentic intelligence in your gut is like critical. And then I think the final thing I would say is, which I haven't always done, but I did in this more personal one, is you've got to rehearse how you're going to recover from it. So I've thought a lot about, I don't think I had any time in that meeting room to think about it. I did afterwards, but I didn't at the time. But in personal situation and in other situations, I now do think not to kind of live in the negative. Actually, Anthony Joshua, I had the pleasure of interviewing Anthony Joshua once, not long before a fight. And we were
Oh,
talking
wow.
and I said to him, so what happens if you don't win? Like, how do you deal with that? And he went, he said, I never talk about that. Please, can you move on? I don't want to talk about that. He wouldn't even allow the words or the conversation to turn to his head. And I remember at the time thinking, wow. Now, I think it's not about blocking it out entirely, but I probably spend either too much time in the catastrophizing, it's all going to go wrong. And I have that image perfectly clear and not the one I want to go to. And now what I've
True.
learned, actually, it's a little bit between the two. So I have this beautiful vision, and it's not about planning a plan B. It's about planning how I'm going to cope with when things go wrong. So now what I've learned to do is I won't catastrophize, and I agree with Auntie Joshua, like don't allow that image, just keep the image that's really super clear in your head. But what I do is go, if that goes wrong, how am I going to deal with it? Rather than what I'd done before was going, if that goes wrong, that's going to happen, that's going to happen next one, and then I catastrophize and I'm like,
Yeah.
there, done, boom, finished. Whereas now I can take smaller moments and do that. And I think high stakes allows us to kind of go, I'm going to make this decision and do it because I'm backing myself and there's instinct and I've thought about imperfection and this is me giving it a go. And most of life is a revolving door, not a one-way door. So if it all goes wrong, I'll just go back again. And then that final bit is going, I've been here, I've probably experienced some of these emotions before. So I'm just going to prepare myself for like, what if? And I will pick myself up and go
Right.
again because that's not the end of the story. So I think that's how.
You've given so many lessons there, nugget after nugget. And I'm very conscious of your time. So I know we have a hard stop literally imminently. But I don't want to let you go before I've asked you the killer question, Nish, which is if I ask you just for that one piece of practical advice, especially for a
Yeah.
fellow senior audience, someone who's at a life stage or a career stage, a leadership stage, where they're C-suite, they've got a lot of high stakes going around. What would your one piece of practical advice be to help them navigate high stakes well? Just that
So I would
one. If
say
you could
it's
only
like
share
don't
one.
confuse polished with being prepared. And what I mean by that is I think that when you're under pressure, it doesn't matter where your life is and whatever, but that moment of feeling under pressure and you've got to make a decision. First of all, as a leader, you most likely, or in an executive, you're most likely to hopefully have built some trust capital. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be in that role without having built some trust to get there. So it's kind of remembering that as your foundation. and then like really staying truly human. That decision in that room is I chose to stay truly human, not just to my decision, but to how we dealt with it in my life decisions. I've stayed truly kind of in alignment with myself, because I think people might forgive a little bit of imperfection in answers and this polish of like, this is all great, my life is wonderful and blah. They can forgive that, but they don't really forgive when you're not human. And I think that for me is not just helps you navigate crisis and high stakes. I think it's what makes you a brilliant leader. And we say a lot of these things without actually doing it. So that would be my, preparedness and a lack of perfection over polish.
I love that. Nish, you've given us a wonderful mic drop moment to end this conversation on. My brain is buzzing. So much to unpack there. Thank you for your wisdom, for your generosity,
Oh,
and for
thank you
being
so
you.
much, Sally. I loved it.